The year was 1904, in the final, crumbling years of the Qing dynasty. Crowds gathered in Beijing to witness what was called justice, but in reality was state-sanctioned horror. At the center of the execution ground stood Fu Zhuli, a woman condemned for the murder of her husband. Her punishment was not swift beheading, the usual fate for capital criminals, but something reserved for crimes considered unforgivable, lingchi, death by 1,000 cuts. Her wrists and ankles were bound tightly to a wooden frame. Officials read her crime aloud, branding her not only as a murderer but as a woman who had violated the sacred order of Confucian society. In imperial law, killing one's husband was not just homicide, it was rebellion against the moral foundation of the empire. That is why Fu Zhuli's death had to be slow, public, and unforgettable. The executioner approached with a sharp blade. The first cut was almost symbolic, slicing flesh from her arm. But it didn't stop there. Dozens of cuts followed, cheeks, chest, thighs, torso, each deliberate, each designed to prolong her agony. Historical accounts describe the victim sometimes being given opium to dull the pain, not out of mercy, but to ensure she remained conscious long enough for the full spectacle. The crowd watched as piece by piece, her body was mutilated. This was not a rare occurrence. From the Tang dynasty onward, lingchi became a tool of terror, reserved for rebels, traitors, and in special cases, women whose crimes threatened the authority of fathers, husbands, or emperors. Not every woman condemned in Imperial China faced the spectacle of lingchi. For lesser crimes, petty theft, disobedience, adultery, the punishment was often more routine, but no less brutal, the bastinado, or beating with heavy rods. One chilling case comes from the Ming dynasty. A palace maid named Yang, accused of stealing silk from the imperial storehouse, was sentenced to 100 blows with the heavy rod. Unlike the lighter bamboo cane used on men, women were struck with thick wooden staves, each blow landing across the buttocks and thighs. Officials recorded that even after 20 or 30 strikes, skin would tear open, muscles bruised black and blue. By 60, the flesh became raw. By 80, the woman often fell unconscious. Few survived the full 100. Yang did not. After the 50th blow, she collapsed, her body convulsing. The beating continued, overseen by eunuchs and guards who had orders to carry out the punishment regardless of her condition. By the time it ended, she was unrecognizable, bleeding, broken, and lifeless. Her corpse was quietly removed, another maid immediately assigned to replace her. What made this punishment particularly cruel was its banality. Executions like lingchi were public theater, but the rod was everyday violence. Women could be beaten for speaking back to their husbands, for minor theft, or even for failing to obey household rules. The law gave magistrates wide power, and once the sentence was handed down, mercy was rare. The rod was not just a weapon, it was a reminder that a woman's body was always vulnerable to the empire's authority. It carried no glory, no spectacle, only pain, humiliation, and often, a slow death. If the heavy rod broke a woman's body, the Kang shattered her spirit. The Kang was a massive wooden collar, sometimes weighing up to 30 kilograms, locked around the neck of prisoners. It was designed not to kill instantly but to grind a woman down through shame, starvation, and exhaustion. One recorded case comes from the Qing dynasty, where a young widow named Li was accused of adultery after being seen in the company of another man. In the eyes of Confucian law, her crime was unforgivable. Widows were expected to remain loyal to their dead husbands for life. The magistrate sentenced her to 3 weeks in the Kang. Her neck was clamped between 2 heavy planks, her arms pinned uselessly at her sides. She could not feed herself, scratch an itch, or even wipe away her own tears. Villagers were ordered to bring her food, but often they mocked or ignored her, forcing her to starve slowly in full view of the community. The Kang also served as a stage of humiliation. Li was paraded through the market streets, stumbling under the weight of the collar while onlookers jeered and spat. Some children threw stones at her, others shouted insults. Every step became agony, the wood rubbed her skin raw, and the sheer weight dragged her shoulders into permanent slouch. By the second week, Li could barely stand. Her face was swollen, her lips cracked with thirst, her clothes soiled because she could not relieve herself in private. Historical reports note that many women sentenced to the Kang collapsed and died before their punishment ended, their bodies left to rot as a final warning. For Li, survival did not matter. When she finally collapsed in the village square, no one rushed to help. The collar remained locked even in death, her body displayed until the magistrate's men dragged her away. The message was clear: a woman's honor was the property of her husband, her family, and ultimately the emperor. To step outside that boundary was to become a living spectacle of disgrace. In Imperial China, the fear of sorcery and witchcraft ran deep. Any woman accused of using charms, spells, or poisons could be branded a threat not just to her family, but to the stability of the empire itself. And for those women, punishment was often carried out with fire and hot irons. One infamous case took place in the Ming dynasty, when a woman named Zhao Shi was accused of cursing her husband with illness. Neighbors claimed she kept strange talismans and burned incense at night, whispering to spirits. Whether true or not didn't matter, the accusation alone was enough. She was dragged to the magistrate's court, convicted without real evidence, and sentenced to torture by hot irons before execution. Witnesses recorded how executioners heated iron rods until they glowed red. Zhao's arms were pinned as the rods were pressed against her skin, searing flesh instantly. Her screams echoed through the courtyard, but the torture was not just about pain, it was meant to force a confession. "Admit your witchcraft," they demanded. Each time she denied it, the irons returned to her thighs, her back, her shoulders. When her body could take no more, Zhao was bound to a wooden post. Bundles of firewood were stacked around her, set alight, and the flames consumed her slowly. Burning was seen as a way to purify her sins, reducing both her body and spirit to ash. The crowd was forced to watch, terrified into silence. What made punishments like this so horrific was their ritualistic cruelty. Fire was not only a weapon, it was a message. Women accused of sorcery were considered dangerous, unnatural, even demonic. By burning them alive, the empire turned execution into a kind of exorcism, warning other women never to step beyond the narrow role society allowed them. Zhao Shi's ashes were scattered in a river, her name erased from local records. But her story survived in whispers, one more reminder that in Imperial China, accusation alone could be a death sentence, and fire was the empire's final answer.